It's funny how people get thrown in prison for things they didn't do, like murder, tax evasion, or bringing tuna casserole to a vegan potluck. But in Ray Kessler's case, it wasn't a misunderstanding over dietary preferences. It was over death, specifically, the alleged death of his wife, Jane. Alleged, because, well, you'll see. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. They're bonus points if it's past 1 a.m. and your lights are off. Douse. Now, as Ray would later mutter to a parole officer with the dramatic flair of a man who's read too many detective novels, I didn't kill her. I just fixed her damn radiator. And so begins a tale that's less about murder and more about mystery, mistaken identity, and melon-related existential crises. Ray Kessler wasn't what you'd call murdery. He was quiet, owned 2 pairs of jeans, and lived in a cul-de-sac where excitement was someone forgetting to bring in their recycling bin. He had a job fixing things, mostly heaters, faucets, and that one weird neighbor's creepy doll collection. The man was about as dangerous as a wet sponge. Jane, his wife, was the opposite. A sharp-witted woman with a flair for sarcasm and disappearing for hours at a time. She worked part-time at a library and full-time at being an enigma. Their marriage was described by Ray's sister as quirky, by their neighbor Donna as suspicious, and by Ray himself as mostly quiet, unless Jane was reorganizing the fridge alphabetically again. Then, one rainy Thursday in November of 1996, Jane was gone. No note, no text. No one texted in '96 unless you were the CEO of Nokia. No calls. Just a scorched scarf found by a ravine and a neighbor who claimed she heard shouting the night before. And just like that, Ray went from mildly boring to headline material. The police were swift. They found the scarf, the half-melted plastic badge from her work lanyard, and a receipt for duct tape bought 3 days earlier by someone with Ray's debit card. Jane's car was abandoned with the driver's side door ajar and one of her shoes underneath it, which always looks dramatic in true crime documentaries. It was like the whole scene had been staged by someone who watched unsolved mysteries on loop and thought, yeah, that's the vibe. Ray, for his part, just kept repeating, I don't know where she is. She was mad about the thermostat. But that's not exactly motive. But in small towns, motive is a flexible concept. So is evidence. All it takes is a neighbor named Donna and a burnt piece of fabric. And suddenly the handyman is in handcuffs. Ray's mugshot was one of those unfortunate freeze frames where you look like you're both mid-sneeze and reconsidering your life choices. He wore a faded flannel, had a tuft of hair poking out like a rebellious eyebrow, and didn't say a word. His public defender said it gave him an air of mystery. The prosecutor said it screamed guilt. Here's where things started slipping sideways. The prosecution had no body, no blood, no weapon, no surveillance footage. Not even a good old-fashioned "her ghost came to me in a dream" testimony. What they did have was circumstantial fluff. A neighbor who thought Ray gave off quiet killer energy, and a scarf that may or may not have belonged to Jane, depending on whether you believed her favorite color was red or burgundy. Despite the gaping holes, the jury didn't take long. Maybe it was Ray's habit of sighing during testimony. Maybe it was the prosecutor's dramatic monologue about a man who thinks silence is louder than screams. Or maybe it was the tabloids plastering headlines like Handyman of Horror and Mr. Fix-It Turns Killer. They found him guilty. Second-degree murder. 25 years with eligibility for parole at 20. Ray didn't shout, didn't cry, just scratched his beard and said, "Guess I'm not fixing that radiator anytime soon." Now here's your historical fact for the night. In 1983, a man named Kirk Bloodsworth became the first American on death row to be exonerated by DNA evidence. He spent 8 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. And you know what? He still believed in the justice system, which proves either remarkable faith or brain damage from banging his head on the bunk too often. Ray had neither faith nor brain damage. What he had was a lot of time, 22 years, to be exact. He read philosophy, loved Camus, hated Kant, and became weirdly good at chess. Even though he never played anyone who wasn't an angry man, nicknamed Beef, he even started writing a book about garden maintenance and injustice, but never finished it because, as he put it, the plot was all weeds. Every so often, he'd hear whispers about Jane. She'd been spotted in Michigan, in Tulsa, once in a casino in Reno, where a woman who might have been Jane ordered a shrimp cocktail and left before finishing it. That detail haunted Ray more than the arrest. She never left food. He'd whisper, like a man reliving trauma. Back home, Donna, the neighbor who testified against him, kept a scrapbook titled Justice for Jane, which included her own theories and several pages about the scarf's symbolism. One page included a doodle of a phoenix rising from flames. Donna had a flair for dramatics. Through all of it, Ray stayed quiet, stoic, a little bitter, sure, but mostly bored, until the day, 5 years after his release, when he saw her, alive, walking out of a Publix grocery store, holding a toddler's hand, laughing like someone who definitely hadn't been murdered in 1996. But we'll get there. For now, let's end on a lighter note. If you ever feel like life's not fair, just remember someone once got sentenced to life in prison because a scarf didn't burn all the way. The courtroom smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and powdered justice. Ray sat stiffly in a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Listening to people he'd never met describe him like he was a villain in a made-for-TV movie, you'd think he was a combination of Dexter, Hannibal Lecter, and that one guy who talks too loud on speakerphone in public, his defense team, meanwhile, had all the persuasive power of a wet envelope. The prosecution opened strong. Ladies and gentlemen, the assistant DA began. This is not just a case of domestic violence. This is premeditated erasure. They really liked that word. Erasure sounded sinister, like a magician who specialized in divorce. Their entire argument hung on 3 things. Ray bought duct tape. The scarf smelled like burnt polyester. Donna, the neighbor, said she heard shouting and a loud bang. When the defense pointed out that Donna also once called 911 because her lawn gnome gave her the evil eye, the jury smirked, but still scribbled things in their notepads. One juror even doodled a sad face next to Ray's name. Not great. They trotted out every mildly suspicious thing Ray had ever done. He once checked out a book on forensics. He liked crime dramas. He repaired a neighbor's basement sink at 2 a.m., which apparently made him too available. At one point, Jane's co-worker testified that Jane had once joked, "If I ever go missing, blame Ray." It was meant as a joke. The prosecutor delivered it like the closing monologue of a Shakespearean tragedy. Ray didn't cry, didn't even flinch. Mostly, he just stared at the blinking light on the exit sign, like he could mentally teleport through it. When asked to testify, he said simply, "I didn't kill her. I loved her." Even if she did label the spice rack like it was a war plan, the spice rack joke didn't land, not even a chuckle. Here's a quirky fact. In ancient Greece, courtroom jurors could number up to 500 people, because Athenians loved chaos and weren't fans of consistency. Ray, sadly, only had 12, and at least 3 of them looked like they were mad about missing Wheel of Fortune for jury duty. One piece of evidence drew uncomfortable attention: Jane's diary. Discovered under a floorboard, it had notes about feeling watched, missing time, and a mysterious entry that simply read, "I saw the van again today," instead of investigating the van. They used it to argue she feared Ray. No one even asked what van. White panel ice cream. The defense attempted to explain that Jane had a vivid imagination and had once insisted their neighbor was in the CIA. Ray said it affectionately. The jury heard paranoia, and he didn't believe her. Another nail. Then came the duct tape receipt. Ray had bought a roll duct tape being, of course, The world's most suspicious hardware item aside from lime and a shovel. Never mind that he was fixing a busted dryer. Duct tape. Definitely murder. That was the vibe. Then came the scarf, found near a ravine, charred at one end, but no blood, no DNA, just soot, wind, and speculation, still. The DA held it up dramatically like a magician revealing a cursed relic. You could almost hear the law and order dun-dun. A forensic tech testified that the burn pattern was consistent with attempted incineration. That phrase, consistent with, is a prosecutor's favorite. It doesn't mean it happened. Just that it wouldn't be weird if it did. Like saying a peanut butter sandwich is consistent with someone trying to poison you. Because technically people have done that before. Ray's attorney tried to object on grounds of vagueness. The judge, who looked like he'd been awake since 1974, overruled without looking up. Ray's brother-in-law, a man who once called tacos Satan's envelope, testified for the prosecution. He and Jane never got along, and he described Ray as weird and too calm for his own good. The kind of guy, he said, who would kill someone and then take a nap. Not really evidence, but apparently vibes counted. To round it all out, the prosecutor read aloud an old argument Jane had written down. Ray doesn't see me. He doesn't hear me. I feel like I'm already dead. Poetic, yes. Literal, probably not. Devastating, in court. Absolutely. By the time closing arguments rolled around, Ray's lawyer was sweating through his cheap blazer and saying things like, "We can't convict a man on feelings," which, unfortunately, is exactly what they did. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours, long enough to order lunch, disagree about mayo, and still have time to destroy a man's life. They came back somber. The forewoman looked like she'd just stepped off a haunted carousel. "Guilty," she said. Ray blinked once, scratched his neck, then said, "Well, ta-da." Sentencing was brisk. 25 years. Eligible for parole in 20. No appeal. The judge called it justice served. Ray's sister sobbed. Donna from next door nodded like a cat who'd caught a bird. The media had a field day. Kessler convicted, husband. Sentenced in no-body murder, ran for weeks. Local news loved the phrase, no-body murder. Very SEO-friendly. He was sent to Fairmeadow Correctional, a facility with low security but high irony. It had a rehabilitation garden shaped like a question mark and mandatory yoga every Thursday. As Ray sat in the back of the prison transport van, watching cornfields blur into each other, he whispered something under his breath. The guard asked, "What was that?" Ray said, "I hope she's somewhere warm. I hope she's not dead." The guard snorted. "Buddy, she's mulch." That was Ray's first night as a convicted murderer, alone in a new room, a metal toilet to his left, a Bible on the shelf, and the sinking feeling that the worst thing wasn't that no one believed him. It was that he wasn't entirely sure he believed himself anymore. Prison is many things. It's loud at the wrong times and quiet when you wish it weren't. It smells like wet concrete and disinfectant. The food tastes like a betrayal of science. But mostly, prison is boring. Terminally. Profoundly. Soul-curdlingly boring. And for Ray Kessler, that was somehow the cruelest part. He didn't make waves. He didn't join a gang or start a fight. He didn't even learn to make moonshine in the laundry room like the guy 3 bunks over, who called himself Fermento. No. Ray kept to himself. He walked laps in the yard. He taught himself chess using a book with the cover torn off. And, most memorably, he spent 10 years in quiet conversation with a parrot named Nietzsche. Now, before you think we've veered into fantasy, here's the scientific fact of the day. In some low-security prisons, animal therapy programs are used to improve inmate behavior and mental health. At Fairmeadow Correctional, that included an aviary project. Ray, who didn't trust humans anymore, volunteered to care for the birds. Nietzsche was a cranky African gray with a vocabulary of about 50 words, most of which were unprintable. He once greeted the warden with, nice pants, liar, which earned him legend status in the West Wing. Ray liked Nietzsche because the bird didn't ask questions, didn't tell him he looked so normal or whisper rumors about scarf fires. Instead, Nietzsche would sit on his perch, bob his head rhythmically, and occasionally screech, "God is dead," in a sing-song voice. It was oddly comforting. The bird outlived 2 cellmates and 1 guard. Ray swore he saw Nietzsche wink at him after the second one slipped on spilled orange juice. Coincidence? Sure, but Nietzsche had a vibe. Ray's days passed in sameness. Wake, eat, walk, read, stare, sleep, repeat. He began studying botany through an old correspondence course and developed an unexpected interest in poisonous plants. Not for any sinister reason, he just thought it was funny that something as pretty as foxglove could stop your heart. Like people, he muttered once, nice on the outside, deadly underneath. That one earned a long stare from a nearby guard. Ray shrugged, just talking about plants. He read Camus, Dostoevsky, and a stack of gardening magazines with the same intensity. A philosophical debate formed in his head, whether the universe was fundamentally absurd or just deeply committed to slapstick. After all, he was in prison for a murder no one could prove happened, caring for a bird who yelled Nietzsche quotes, and writing long letters to no one in particular. Which brings us to the quirky detail of the day. Ray once wrote a 13-page letter addressed to future me. If you're still a human, it was found in his bunk after his cell was searched for contraband. They were looking for Pruno. They found musings on metaphysics. He opened it with, "Dear Ray, if you're reading this, you're either free or still very annoyed." As the years crawled by, Ray became something of a myth inside the prison. New inmates would whisper, "That's Kessler. He killed his wife and never blinked." Others said he was innocent, that he was framed by the CIA because Jane was a spy. Someone even claimed Jane had faked her death and was now a magician's assistant in Las Vegas. Ray didn't bother correcting them. The guards liked him, called him Mr. Fix-It. If a microwave sparked or a toilet wouldn't flush, Ray had it sorted before lunch. One officer joked that Ray had done more plumbing inside than outside. Ray smiled and said, "Well, you lock a man up with enough pipes and regret. He gets creative." But despite the routine and the bleak comfort of monotony, one thing never left him: Jane. He dreamed of her often, sometimes screaming, sometimes laughing, sometimes just staring. In one recurring dream, she was in their old kitchen, alphabetizing the pantry again. He'd stand in the doorway and ask, "Where did you go?" And she'd reply, "You weren't listening." Then she'd vanish, like steam. The dreams blurred with memory. What did her voice really sound like? Did she actually wear that red scarf all the time? Or had the media photos implanted that in his mind? Had he argued with her the night before she vanished? Or was that just something? Donna said, "This is where the philosophical debate comes in. If enough people tell you something happened, and you start to remember it, does that make it true?" Ray wasn't sure. Memory, after all, is deeply fallible. Studies show that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially after trauma. But what if the trauma wasn't the crime? What if the trauma was the lie? Every year, on the anniversary of Jane's disappearance, Ray sat in the prison chapel. He wasn't religious, though he admitted once that he liked the smell of old hymn books. He would sit in the back row, close his eyes, and try to remember something true. One year, he remembered how Jane used to hum while brushing her teeth. The next, he remembered that she once gave him a coupon for one get-out-of-jail-free foot massage. Dark irony. Then, in year 17, he remembered something he hadn't thought about in over a decade. The night she vanished, he'd heard the garage door open. That wasn't strange. But then he remembered a second sound, a door closing, a whisper, something metallic clicking shut. He told no one, not because it was incriminating, because it felt impossible. like his brain had picked a random sound from 20 years ago and handed it to him like, "Hey, found this in storage. Want it?" Could that be real? Or just the prison doing what it does? Warping time. Warping thought. Turning old doubts into new questions. By year 21, Ray was eligible for parole. He wore his best denim. Nietzsche had retired or been adopted. No one was sure. And the parole board reviewed his case with the enthusiasm of people trapped in a meeting that went too long. They asked him the usual: "Do you feel remorse? Have you been rehabilitated? Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" He answered honestly, "I don't know if I belong out there, but I didn't kill her. If you're still looking for remorse, maybe ask whoever did." It was a risky move, but it worked. 6 months later, Ray walked out of Fairmeadow. No cameras, no reporters, just a warm breeze, a duffel bag of state-issued belongings, and the eerie sensation that the world had shrunk while he was gone. The sky looked too big, the colors too sharp. A child screamed in delight across the street, and he flinched. It would take time, maybe forever. He stood outside the gate for a long while before whispering to himself, "I hope she's alive." Nietzsche would have said something snarky. Instead, the wind just said nothing at all. You'd think after 2 decades in prison, a man might walk out with a bucket list, travel, see the ocean, eat something that didn't come on a beige tray. Ray Kessler. He bought a used Toyota Corolla and went to Home Depot, his first purchase as a free man, 1 Phillips head screwdriver, 2 packs of screws, and a potted cactus named Marv. I figured Marv won't leave either. He told the cashier, who blinked twice and offered him a membership card. Ray moved into a halfway house just outside Tallahassee, the kind of place that smelled like burnt toast and hope. His roommates were ex-cons, mostly harmless. One made birdhouses. Another collected stamps from envelopes no one had sent him. Ray didn't ask questions. He'd had enough of those to last a lifetime. He spent most of his days fixing things loose floorboards, a misaligned porch step, a window that screamed every time you opened it. The work was simple, the routine sacred. It kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering too far. But at night, his thoughts crept in like fog. Jane's face, blurred by time, her voice, a mix of memory and imagination, her last words to him, if there had even been any. One evening, as he sorted screws by length, a deeply soothing hobby, he remembered something strange from the trial, a photograph Jane standing outside their house with a man no one could identify. The picture was fuzzy, probably taken with one of those mid-90s disposable cameras that made everyone look like they were being haunted. Ozuai. The prosecution said it was just a neighbor. Ray, at the time, hadn't thought much of it. But now, in the silence of his new room, it gnawed at him. He revisited their old neighborhood on a drizzly Tuesday, the kind where the air feels too heavy for breathing. Their house was still there. New paint, a different fence, wind chimes that made a sound like something trying too hard to be cheerful. He parked across the street and just watched. After an hour, he got out, walked slowly, touched the gate. It creaked like it remembered him. He made his way to the garage, which looked unchanged except for a new keypad lock. His fingers itched. He had the code. Of course he did. He'd installed it. It was still 042 Jane's birthday. The door clicked open. Inside, it smelled of motor oil and lemon-scented cleaner. There was a bike, a snow shovel, a tennis racket, and behind a stack of old paint cans, a door that should not have been there. He blinked, once, twice. The garage had never had a back room, not when they lived here. He would have known. He'd built half the shelving himself. Ray stepped forward. The door was narrow, wooden, and just slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Inside was a windowless space. No furniture, no dust, just a bare bulb swinging from the ceiling and a single note, taped to the far wall. His heart thudded, that particular rhythm he hadn't felt since the sentencing. He approached the note like it might bite. It read, "Not dead, not sorry." The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted, Jane's. Ray staggered back a step. The room swayed, or maybe he did. He checked the note for fingerprints, out of habit, then laughed bitterly, like he'd remember how to dust for prints after 20 years. He took a photo, touched the wall. It was real, not a prank, not a hallucination, a message. Whoever had lived here after them either hadn't found the room, or hadn't cared. Ray backed out, closed the door, and returned to his car. He didn't drive off immediately. He sat for a long time, listening to the rain and the low buzz of his thoughts rearranging themselves. Jane was alive. She had been alive. Here, in this house. She had built a secret room, or used one he never knew about, and left a message for someone, him the world. Not dead, not sorry. That didn't sound like someone in danger. That sounded like someone who'd left on purpose. Back at the halfway house, Ray couldn't sleep. He stared at Marv the cactus like it might give him answers. He paced. He drank cold coffee. He replayed every conversation, every argument, every tiny moment that now felt like a clue. Why had she left? Was she running, hiding? Was it from him? He didn't think so. Their arguments had been petty, domestic, thermostat levels, laundry systems, her obsession with alphabetizing their movie collection. Nothing big, nothing fatal. So who was she hiding from? Ray turned on his ancient laptop, a gift from the halfway house, and typed Jane's maiden name into every search bar he could find. No hits, no social media, not even a LinkedIn. It was like she'd vanished from the internet entirely, which, in today's world, is more suspicious than a trench coat in summer. He dug deeper. Obituaries, court records, property transfers, still nothing. Until he searched an old address from her childhood and found something odd. A P.O. box, registered under a different name, J. Milner, in a nearby town. The name meant nothing to him, but the location only a 2-hour drive away. He didn't sleep. He just waited for morning. When the sun rose, Ray packed a peanut butter sandwich and hit the road. It felt like a field trip. If the destination was emotional trauma, the town was small. One main street, 2 diners, a gas station that looked like it hadn't updated its snack inventory since Y2K. He parked across from the post office and waited, watched, ate half his sandwich, waited more. Then movement. A woman approached the P.O. boxes, shoulder-length brown hair, sunglasses, a baseball cap. She had a stroller with a child in it. Ray froze. She opened box, Duwer 317, took out a few letters, turned. Their eyes met. Her mouth opened slightly. A cantaloupe rolled out of the bottom of the stroller bag and hit the pavement. Neither of them moved. And that's when Ray knew for sure Jane wasn't dead. She was shopping for fruit. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't run. Jane just stood there, frozen in place like a statue in aisle 4. Her hand clutched the mail. Her mouth, still slightly open. The cantaloupe had come to rest against her sandal, as if trying to join the awkwardness. Ray, for his part, blinked like he was buffering. It had been 27 years since they last saw each other. Give or take a fake death and a felony conviction, time had done its usual number. Her hair was darker now, her face thinner, more angular, like it had been whittled by secrets, but her eyes, same eyes, like coffee left on the burner a little too long. He took one step forward. Jane. She hesitated. Just a twitch, just a flicker in the left corner of her mouth that said, "I know that voice." Then, she turned, grabbed the cantaloupe, and walked away, casually, as if bumping into your long-imprisoned, presumed murderous ex-husband was the kind of thing you just shrugged off like a coupon for expired yogurt. Ray stood there for another full minute before remembering how legs worked. He followed her at a distance, not in a horror movie stalker way, but in a did I just hallucinate my formerly dead wife in front of a P.O. box kind of way? She moved briskly, pushing the stroller with practiced ease. The child inside, maybe 3, maybe 4, stared back at Ray with the unfazed expression of someone raised in a world where nothing surprises them. They turned the corner. Jane unlocked a modest blue sedan, buckled the child in, and paused just for a moment before getting behind the wheel. Then she drove away. Ray, who hadn't run in years, sprinted to his Corolla, peeled out of the lot with all the grace of a startled walrus, and followed her. They drove for 25 minutes, out of town, past a diner shaped like a hamburger, past a billboard for a water park that closed in 2006, then into a residential area where all the houses looked like they'd been designed by someone who deeply admired beige. She pulled into a driveway, got out, unbuckled the child, walked up to a door. A man answered it. He was tall, balding, wearing a world's okayest dad apron, kissed her on the cheek, took the child into his arms, smiled like someone who didn't think his wife was legally dead. Ray parked 2 houses down, slumped in his seat, and tried to breathe normally. His heart was playing drums with no rhythm section. What was he supposed to do now? Knock, shout, file a complaint with the Ghostbusters. Instead, he did the thing he was best at. He watched. For the next 4 hours, Ray sat in his car. Jane and the man her husband cooked dinner. Judging by the faint smell of garlic and the occasional clatter of pans, a child's laughter bubbled out of the open windows. They were a family. A functioning, mid-sized, 5-bedroom American family. Ray didn't feel rage. He didn't even feel betrayed. He felt confused, like he'd accidentally walked into the wrong stage play and now everyone was politely pretending he was meant to be there. Eventually, night fell. Lights went out. The house went dark. Ray stayed until 2 a.m., just to be sure. Then he drove home, his mind buzzing with questions. Let's throw in our historical fact of the day. In 2004, a man named Nicholas Alaverdian faked his own death to avoid charges and resurfaced years later in Scotland, living under a new name and claiming to be someone else entirely. Faking your death is not only possible, it's shockingly achievable if you're committed and good at paperwork. Ray hadn't thought Jane capable of that level of subterfuge. But now he wasn't sure what else she'd faked. He returned the next day, parked in the same spot, this time with snacks. He took notes, time stamps, routes, license plate numbers. He watched Jane take the child to daycare. He watched the man leave in a work truck labeled Fenerty's HVAC Solutions. Ray jotted that down, too. It felt like a stakeout, except he wasn't a cop, or a detective, or even invited. He was a ghost haunting the outskirts of someone else's life. 3 days into surveillance, something strange happened. He followed the HVAC truck to a warehouse on the edge of town, a squat brick building with tinted windows and a sign that said, "Authorized personnel only, standard workplace fare," but parked out front. A car he recognized, from a photo shown briefly, 2 decades ago, during his trial. The same blurry car that had appeared in the background of Jane's last known location. Ray's stomach turned. He circled the building on foot. There was a side door unmarked. Rusted, he peered inside through a slit in the blinds. He saw the man from the house, Jane's new husband. But he wasn't fixing an air conditioner. He was in a suit, speaking to 2 other people, one of whom placed a folder on the table that read, "Classified, Azur." Now, Ray had watched enough late-night documentaries in prison to know the difference between HVAC blueprints and something you're not supposed to know exists. This man was not just a handyman, not unless air conditioning now came with top-secret briefings. Back at the halfway house, Ray printed out photos. He built a corkboard, connected dots with red string, not because it was necessary, but because it felt deeply satisfying. Jane, the house, the hidden room, the note. Now this a man, pretending to be someone else, possibly involved in government work, raising a child with a woman who had been legally dead for over 2 decades. And Ray was the only one who knew. Here's your philosophical debate of the day. What's more unsettling, knowing you were lied to, or realizing that no one cares? You were lied to. Ray had done 22 years. The world had moved on. Jane had moved on. The system didn't want to revisit a closed case, and yet, here he was, unraveling a conspiracy with no badge, no allies, and no plan. He knew he should walk away, go back to gardening, let it go. But curiosity is like rust, it creeps, it eats, and it never really stops. So he did the only thing that made sense at the time. He followed Jane again. This time, she noticed. It was a Wednesday, which statistically means nothing but emotionally always feels like a day where bad things happen in grocery stores. Ray was sitting in his Corolla, partially obscured behind a suspiciously convenient hedge, watching Jane pick up her kid from preschool. He'd become something between a private investigator and a raccoon curious, determined, and doing most of his thinking from behind bushes. Jane buckled the child into the car seat, glanced around the lot, and this time, her eyes locked directly on him. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't, oh, that guy just looks like my long-dead ex-husband. It was recognition, sharp and cold, the kind of look that doesn't say, oh, you're alive, but instead says, you were supposed to stay in your little box. Then she did something unexpected. She waved. Not a friendly wave, not a let's get coffee wave, more like a subtle flick of the fingers that said, I see you. Stop. Then she drove off. No panic. No rush. Just control. She had the calm of someone who wasn't shocked. That rattled Ray more than any chase scene ever could. He followed anyway. Of course he did. Obsession is just curiosity with a caffeine addiction. She took back roads, winding through neighborhoods he didn't recognize, before pulling into a narrow, unpaved path behind a row of industrial buildings. Ray followed, far enough back to keep her out of his line of sight, but close enough to see where she stopped. An abandoned laundromat, windows boarded, weeds waist-high, a flickering security light that hadn't been secure since 1998. Ray parked around the corner and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then, the back door opened. Jane stepped out. Alone, no child, no car. Ray's instincts screamed. This was a setup. She'd ditch the car and come back on foot, which meant she knew he was tailing her and she had a plan. She walked straight toward him. He panicked, ducked, nearly cracked his forehead on the glove box. When he looked back up, she was there, knocking on his window like someone ordering fast food. Ray rolled it down an inch, just enough for paranoia to breathe. She leaned in. You need to stop, she said, her voice flatter than a pancake that gave up on life. Ray blinked. You're alive. Jane sighed. And you're observant. She climbed into the passenger seat like it was still 1996, and they were on their way to pick up dry cleaning. Same casual grace, same faint smell of lavender and impending doom. You shouldn't have come back to the house, she said. I went to prison. He replied. Yeah, she said, like that had been mildly inconvenient. Ray's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. 22 years. Jane. 22 birthdays. 22 Thanksgivings where the main course was depression. She glanced out the window. I didn't ask for that. You left a note, he hissed. Not dead, not sorry. Who does that? Jane turned back to him. Someone who had no choice. And that's when she dropped it. Calm as ever. I wasn't running from you, Ray. I was running from them. Cue dramatic thunder. Cue the sudden realization that this was no longer a domestic tragedy. It was a spy novel. She didn't explain much. Jane always had a talent for being vague at maximum emotional impact. They came to me in '94. She said, offered a deal, disappear, change my name, help them with something I was uniquely positioned to do, said it was patriotism. Who are they? Ray asked. The kind of people who don't give you a business card, she replied. He laughed bitterly. So you faked your death, let me rot. That was patriotic. Jane looked tired, not in a sleepy way, in a soul-weary, watch too many lives fall apart kind of way. They said you'd be let go. They told me you'd get a plea deal. They didn't expect it to go that far. Ray stared at her. They underestimated the legal system. That's rich. She shrugged. They don't think about people, just pieces. Then she reached into her coat and handed him an envelope, unmarked, soft, heavy. Open it when you're not being watched, she said. You probably are. He raised an eyebrow. By who Donna from next door? She didn't laugh. They watch me. They'll watch you now, too. She got out of the car without another word, slipped behind the laundromat, gone. Ray sat there with the envelope in his lap, resisting the urge to tear it open like a scratch-off ticket from hell. Instead, he drove, 20 minutes out of town, parked behind a bowling alley, sat under the one security light that still worked. Then, finally, he opened it. Inside photos. Jane, younger, in different countries, with different hair, different names, always near men in suits, always looking like she wasn't supposed to be in the frame. There was a photo of her and the man from the house, Mr. Okayest Dad, except in this photo. He was wearing a military uniform, different name tag, different country, a background that looked Eastern European. Then came the documents. 2 birth certificates for the child, one in Florida, one in Romania. 2 sets of passports, a USB drive, and a typed letter. Ray. If you're reading this, you didn't give up, which is exactly why I never wanted you involved. I'm sorry, not just for leaving, but for not being able to explain why. I thought I could disappear clean. They assured me you'd be spared. The man you've seen me with isn't who he says he is. Neither am I. But the child. He's real. He's innocent. I need you to stop looking, not for my sake. For his, Jakar. Ray folded the letter slowly. She wasn't hiding because she was guilty. She was hiding because she was dangerous. Or worse, because someone else was. Here's your quirky off-topic fact of the day. Octopuses have 3 hearts and blue blood. And when stressed, they sometimes eat their own arms, which is just to say, humans aren't the only ones who destroy themselves under pressure. Ray, sitting there in a car full of lies and expired Altoids, suddenly understood the metaphor a little too well. He stared at the envelope, the USB, the double lives. And for the first time in decades, he didn't know what to do next. He wasn't angry anymore. He was terrified. Ray didn't sleep that night. He tried. He laid in bed at the halfway house staring at the ceiling tiles, counting cracks like constellations. Each one reminded him of something Jane's face in the courtroom, the scorched scarf by the ravine, the folder labeled classified, and now, this child, the kid who looked too normal to be caught in a Cold War sequel. He thought about the USB stick, still tucked safely in his sock drawer next to his parole paperwork, and a photo of his late mother that looked like it had been taken through a potato. Should he plug it in, give it to someone, drop it in a lake, and pretend none of this ever happened? Instead, he did what any responsible adult would do. He Googled, how to open USB without being tracked. Now, Ray wasn't tech-savvy. In fact, during his time inside, the internet had evolved from dial-up to TikTok without consulting him, but he'd read enough thrillers to know that plugging mysterious thumb drives into your personal computer was a bad idea. That was basically the digital equivalent of licking a subway pole. So he borrowed a friend's laptop, an older model, barely able to run Minesweeper, and drove to the public library, 2 towns over. There, hidden between a shelf of outdated tax manuals and an oddly aggressive quilting magazine. He plugged it in. The drive was encrypted. Of course it was. But there was one unprotected file, a T-text document titled, Read Me If You Dare. Ray rolled his eyes. Subtle. He muttered. Inside were GPS coordinates. 1 set. In the middle of the Everglades. "Well," he said, glancing around the library, "that's not suspicious at all. Here's your historical fact of the day. In 1943, the Allies launched Operation Mincemeat, a successful British deception strategy that involved planting fake documents on a dead body to mislead the Nazis about an invasion. It worked. Entire military operations have hinged on misleading information delivered just like this: dead drops, fake papers, and silent trails. Ray didn't want to believe that's what this was, but when you've already gone to prison for a murder that didn't happen, your standards for realistic life events shift dramatically. He pocketed the drive and checked out a paperback about Florida wildlife survival tips. The librarian raised an eyebrow. Ray nodded solemnly and said, "Family vacation." That seemed to satisfy her. 2 days later, Ray found himself ankle-deep in swamp water, dodging mosquitoes the size of philosophy majors and wondering if this was what the parole board had in mind when they said, "Integrate responsibly into society." The GPS coordinates led him to a clearing. There, buried under a mossy slab of limestone and a conveniently light layer of dirt, he found a metal case. Inside, more documents, another thumb drive, and a phone. Old school, brick style, no GPS, just a list of preloaded contacts. The first name, Icebox. The second, Diadi. Ray didn't call either. Not yet. He was still in the information-collecting phase of his panic spiral. The second USB was also encrypted, but the phone had lit up when he pressed a button. A message displayed. "Nice to see you again, Ray." He dropped it, literally flung it into the mud like it had teeth. It buzzed again. "Don't worry. It's just me. Don't freak out." Another buzz, this time a call. He didn't answer, because this was not a phase of his life where answering mystery phones in swamps seemed like the best idea. Instead, he dried it off, wrapped everything back up, and headed back to the car he'd parked a mile away on foot, through grass that whispered and shadows that swayed. He was halfway there when he realized he wasn't alone. At first, it was just a feeling, that prickling you get on the back of your neck when someone's staring at you from behind a set of blinds, or when the deer in the woods suddenly stop chewing like they've all agreed you're on the menu. Ray froze. To his left, something shifted. He spun. Hello. Silence. He kept walking. Faster now. Then he heard it, branches crunching. Not a raccoon. Too deliberate. He turned again and saw a shape. Human. Moving away. Not toward him. But it had been watching. No question. Ray didn't run. Running in the swamp is a good way to meet alligators and death in the same afternoon. Instead, he walked fast. Steady. Trying not to look like prey. He reached his car just as dusk turned the trees into shadows and the insects into a symphony of chaos, threw the case into the trunk, drove away like he was fleeing a haunted theme park. At a gas station 30 miles north, he stopped, washed his hands, bought beef jerky and a lemonade, sat in the lot and stared into the distance like a man who had just realized his entire life was now a side quest in someone else's spy thriller. Later that night, back at the halfway house, Ray finally gave in and powered up the burner phone. There were now 3 messages. "You've gone too far. Ray, we're trying to protect you. Don't contact her again." He read them in order, then again in reverse. Didn't matter. They were still terrifying. Then came the 4th message, in a different font, a little glitchy, almost like someone else was piggybacking on the phone's software. "They're lying to you. And underneath that, check the library card." Ray frowned. What library card? Then he remembered. Taped inside the first envelope Jane had given him was an old library card from their hometown. The card number had been scribbled over, replaced with a strange code he hadn't deciphered yet. He dug it out, held it under the light. It now looked different, like heat had revealed invisible ink, scrawled faintly across the back. "The truth is buried where the icebox hums. Here's your off-topic fun fact. Humming refrigerators emit a constant 50 or 60 hertz hum that's used in forensic audio analysis to timestamp recordings. That hum is called Maine's hum, and it's sometimes the only way investigators can date unknown tapes. Ray didn't know that, but he did know Jane used to refer to their old deep freezer as the icebox, like she was a 1930s housewife in a noir film. Which meant she was sending him back again. Back to the house, back to where it had all started. The garage, the scarf, the room that shouldn't have existed. It was waiting for him, still humming, still hiding something. Shapudat. The old house was quieter than he remembered. Not the quiet of peace, but that padded, almost too still hush. Like the air itself was holding its breath. Ray parked a block away and walked in the dark. The moon hung low and orange, like someone had dipped it in rust and forgot to rinse it off. He wasn't nervous. No, that feeling had been burned out of him somewhere around year 8 in prison. Sanded down by late-night lockdowns and unprovoked shakedowns, what he felt now was something slower, heavier, like gravity had gained a few pounds. He reached the fence, now reinforced with plastic lattice, pulled open the gate. It creaked, just like before. Ray moved like a shadow. Quiet shoes, quiet breath, quiet soul. He slid around the side of the house, past the rhododendrons Jane had hated, to the back where the garage waited like an unopened letter from a stranger. The door code was still 0412, either a testament to Jane's laziness or her belief that no one would come back. Inside, the garage looked the same as before, neat, swept, unnervingly sterile, but Ray wasn't here for nostalgia. He moved straight to the hidden door behind the paint cans, opened it. The room still stood, light bulb still swaying slightly from his last visit, no note this time. But a low humming sound was now audible. Not loud, not mechanical, just persistent, like a whisper made of static. Ray stepped in. He pressed his hand against the far wall, knocked. A hollow echo responded. He circled the perimeter, fingers dragging across drywall and seams. But it wasn't. Then he saw it. A faint outline, a square, just above the floorboards, a hatch. He dropped to his knees, heart slow but steady, opened it. Inside an old freezer. Here's your science fact of the night cold storage is an excellent way to preserve biological evidence. Forensic experts have found viable DNA in frozen tissue decades after the original crime. In one famous case, evidence stored in a meat freezer led to a conviction 25 years later. Ray stared at the appliance. It wasn't plugged in, yet it still hummed. He opened the lid. Inside was darkness. No frost, no food, no body. But something was there, a shoebox, taped shut with duct tape that had yellowed with age. He pulled it out, carried it to the garage floor, peeled back the tape with steady hands. Inside, a bundle of photographs, 2 cassette tapes, a pair of gloves, a child's drawing, and 1 VHS tape labeled simply Harlan. Ray sat back, his brain suddenly overwhelmed by memories he didn't even know he'd stored. Harlan was a name Jane used once, a passing comment during a fight. "You're not like Harlan." She'd snapped. He had assumed it was an ex-boyfriend. Maybe her dad. He never asked. Now, here was Harlan, in black permanent marker, staring at him from the face of a forgotten videotape. The photographs were faded but sharp enough. Jane, Harlan, another man, a woman. Each photo looked like a passport photo that had been cursed. No one smiled. Everyone wore sunglasses. Some had dates, most didn't. In one photo, Jane stood in front of a van. The van the same make and model the neighbor had once said was parked outside the night she vanished. Ray flipped through them slowly, piecing together a timeline that didn't want to be assembled. The last photo was different. A picture of him. Ray. El Oriz. But from behind, taken at a distance, through blinds. He staggered back. They had been watching him. Even before she left. The gloves were small, child-sized, blue. knitted. Inside one, he found a folded note. "If you're here, I ran out of time. Find the boy. He's not just ours. He's theirs. 2. Harlan was the key. But I lost him. He's buried where the hum started. J." Ray stared at the note for a long time. Not just ours. The child he'd seen Jane with. The one in the stroller. Ray did the math. The kid was young 4, maybe 5. Jane had been gone much longer than that, which meant the child wasn't Ray's, but apparently the child wasn't just hers either. What did that mean? Genetic material. A government experiment. A failed witness protection scheme. He didn't know. All he knew was this: Jane believed the child was important, dangerous, maybe special, certainly. And the only other person who might have known the truth, this Harlan was now presumably buried, somewhere near where the hum started. Ray sat back on the cold garage floor, VHS in one hand, gloves in the other, surrounded by the fragments of a mystery so twisted it felt mythological. If Greek gods had email, this would have been their drama. He needed answers. The VHS tape was first. He didn't own a VCR, but the halfway house had one in the community room, mostly used for watching ancient aerobics videos from the Reagan era. At 2:13 a.m., Ray slid the tape into the machine. The screen flickered, static, then a slow, shaky image. Jane, sitting in a plastic chair, fluorescent light above her. She looked tired, paler than he remembered. She began to speak. "If you're watching this, Ray, I'm sorry. Not for leaving. Not for what I had to do. I'm sorry you got pulled back in. This isn't about me anymore. It's about the child. Our child. Not by blood. Maybe. But we chose him. We raised him for 4 years before the relocation. He's not ordinary. That's why they wanted him. That's why they'll never stop looking for him." She glanced off camera. "If they find this tape, I'm already gone." The screen went to static. Ray hit rewind, hit play again. Same message. He sat in the flickering glow of that old community TV, hands trembling for the first time in years. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He was protecting something real. Here's your quirky detail for today. In 2018, scientists in Japan created a robotic roach with artificial intelligence capable of learning escape patterns to evade being caught, which means even insects are developing contingency plans. 2. Ray now realized he needed one of his own, because if Jane was right, this wasn't over. It had never really started, and the hum was getting louder. By morning, Ray was starting to feel like a Wikipedia rabbit hole in human form. Every answer brought 5 new questions, and each one had more acronyms, fewer rules, and increasing references to people who may or may not exist. He needed help, real help. So he called the only person who'd ever stayed loyal, even when loyalty meant awkward Thanksgivings, judgmental glances, and once accidentally mailing Ray a postcard that said, "Wish you were here," while he was still in prison. Her name was Carla, his sister. She picked up after 2 rings and said, without preamble, "What did you do?" Ray chuckled. "It's not what I did. It's what she didn't do, like die." Pause. "Sign dozens." Then, calmly, "I'm coming over." Carla had always been sharp. In high school, she'd once hacked the school's PA system to play whale noises during morning announcements. She'd been a lawyer. Briefly. Until she realized she hated arguing with men in bow ties. Now she taught computer science and collected dead cell phones for the vibes. She arrived with 2 bagels, 3 USB adapters, and a look that said, "This better be worth it." Ray laid it all out: photos, notes, tapes. The phrase, "the truth is buried where the icebox hums." She took it in like someone skimming through a spy novel they didn't want to admit was getting good. Finally, she said, "You know this is insane." "Right. Insane like aliens," Ray said. "Or insane like plausible deniability." She nodded thoughtfully. "Both They ran the second USB on her old ThinkPad, the one she kept for paranoid emergencies. It booted like a cough. Inside a series of encrypted folders with names like Bell Tower, Arcline, and Nocturne Child. Carla cracked one with a brute force tool. She said was technically legal if you're really fast. Inside were documents, flight records, phone logs, DNA reports. One file was a PDF titled Project H, G, Subset, D. They opened it. Diagrams, test results, case notes, and near the bottom, a scanned birth certificate for a child named Simon K. Milner. Jane's last name. A child born 5 years ago in New Mexico. Father unknown. Mother redacted. But there was a note. Subject exhibits irregular neural patterning at 23 months. Referred to icebox for behavioral containment. Tess. Carla stared at it. Did they contain a toddler? Ray shrugged helplessly. He seemed normal. I mean, he was chewing on a snack cup when I saw him. She rubbed her temples. You know what this smells like? Black-budget weird science. Brain manipulation. Psychic kids. The usual secret government bedtime story. Ray blinked. Psychic. That's where we're at. Ray, she said flatly. You've been tailed by people who text in code and bury USBs in the swamp. Let's not pretend the line of plausibility hasn't already gone cliff diving. Here's your true fact of the day. In the 1970s, the U.S. government ran a project called Stargate to test whether remote viewers psychics could spy on foreign targets. Spoiler, it didn't work, but it ran for 20 years and cost millions. Carla didn't believe in mind reading, but she did believe in bad ideas with government funding. She ran the names from the documents through a few databases. One hit Dr. Harlan G. Vess, neuroscientist, formerly with DARPA, went missing in 2002, declared dead in 2010, last known location a federal lab in northern Georgia, facility code named Icebox. Ray felt the floor tilt beneath him. The truth is buried where the icebox hums. It wasn't just poetic, it was literal. They mapped the location, a decommissioned research outpost near Savannah, officially shut down after mold was found in the HVAC. Unofficially, well, if mold could redact documents, Ray might have believed that it was isolated, surrounded by trees, water, and history that had been scrubbed cleaner than a politician's search history. Ray knew what had to happen. He had to go. Carla, who had only just finished her second bagel, muttered, "You're going to get shot, or detained, or abducted by lizard people." Ray grinned. "I've already done prison. What's left?" She rolled her eyes, but reached for her keys. "You're not going alone." The drive took 6 hours and 17 arguments, mostly about directions, whether aliens are technically people, and how many gas station hot dogs one man should be allowed to eat in a lifetime. Ray's number 5 per stop. By dusk, they reached the outer gate, rusted, locked, but not abandoned. Signs warned against trespassing with the kind of legal language that implied, "People disappear here, and no one fills out paperwork." Carla scouted ahead, found a hole in the fence, and muttered, "Somebody wants this to look sealed." But it isn't. Inside, the building loomed. Cinder blocks, steel doors, rows of tinted windows that reflected the moon like eyes. Ray stepped forward. The hum was faint but real, a low, throbbing sound beneath the air, like a giant, sleeping engine under the earth. Inside the facility, everything smelled like copper and secrets. Dust covered the floor, but the dust had patterns, tracks, smears, evidence of recent activity. Someone had been through here not long ago. They moved room to room, labs, offices, observation chambers with thick glass and notes scrawled on dry erase boards that read things like, "Test on 87, subject unaffected by light stimulus. S. 4 is showing signs of autonomous cognition. Begin phase D." At the back of the facility, they found it. A freezer unit. Huge, industrial, humming. It bore the label Icebox Room 3C. Ray's skin went cold, not from the temperature, from recognition. They opened it. Inside, not bodies, not brains in jars. A single locker, labeled Harlan G. Vess. They opened the locker. Inside a coat, an ID badge, and a note. Too late. He's awake. They heard the sound seconds later. A whirring noise. Somewhere between a hard drive spinning up and a turbine sighing. Lights flickered. Somewhere down the hallway. A door slammed shut. Ray looked at Carla. She raised her eyebrows. You ever think maybe you should have just stayed in jail? He nodded. Every day. Here's your philosophical debate of the day. If knowledge makes you unsafe, is ignorance a form of freedom or just a prettier cage? Ray no longer had the luxury of not knowing. He was in the belly of the hum now. And whatever had started 27 years ago wasn't done humming yet. The hallway was lit by emergency fluorescents, the kind that made everything look like it was filmed during a panic attack. Ray stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if the floor might suddenly decide to collapse out of politeness. Carla followed behind, clutching the folder of documents like a holy relic, muttering, "Next time, we fake your death." Somewhere deeper in the building, the hum grew louder, rhythmic, almost pulsing. It wasn't the dull drone of old machinery. It had a pattern, almost like breathing. That's when Ray realized it. It was Morse code. He couldn't translate it not yet, but the repetition, the pauses, the syncopation. It wasn't mechanical. It was deliberate. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Carla nodded. "It's saying something. Not sure what, but whatever it is, it's definitely not please stay." They found a map of the facility in a cracked glass case mounted on the wall. It showed 3 main areas: administrative offices, containment labs, and something ominously called cognitive echo chambers. Echo chambers, Carla muttered. Sounds like Twitter with lab coats. Ray pointed to the back of the facility. That's where room 3C is. That's where the humming's loudest. They moved quietly, footsteps echoing off the walls like reluctant ghosts. The temperature dropped with every turn. Somewhere along the way, they passed a room labeled Observation Bay. 4. A glass-walled chamber with a chair bolted to the center. Surrounded by speakers and cameras, a recorder sat on the desk. Still powered on. Ray pressed play. A child's voice crackled through. "Why do they keep asking me about colors? I see the colors. Even when my eyes are closed, I see people's colors." Then silence. Then, softly, "Tell the man he doesn't need to be sad anymore. I know he misses the woman in the scarf." "Was her?" Ray stopped the recording. His throat went dry. That wasn't a test subject talking cool. That was Simon. Here's your science fact of the day. Synesthesia is a neurological condition in which stimulation of one sense leads to involuntary experiences in another, like seeing sounds as colors or tasting words. Some forms are benign, others can be disorienting. Now imagine a child whose entire world blurs those lines, and then imagine someone trying to weaponize that. Carla stepped closer to the glass. They weren't testing vision or intelligence. They were testing perception. Ray looked pale, and they were using Jane's kid to do it. Carla flipped through the folder, found a diagram labeled Cognitive Isolation Grid, H.G. Vess Protocol. It looked like a maze designed by a paranoid genius, or a confused spider. Then she found something worse, a document labeled Discontinued Subjects, Non-Responsive, Terminated. 37 names. Some redacted, some with a check mark next to them. Near the bottom, subject, K5 Simon M., status reassigned. Reassigned, Ray said. What does that mean? Carla didn't answer. She just pointed at a note scribbled beside it. Reintegration successful. Parental unit unaware of activation trigger. Ray blinked. Parental unit. That's Jane, Carla said. They're saying she doesn't know the full story. Which meant Simon didn't just escape with her. He was placed with her, like a time bomb with curly hair and a juice box. The closer they got to room 3C, the louder the hum became. Now it was unmistakably code, not Morse, not binary, something else. A language. Maybe. Ray's head started to ache, not in a painful way, more like an itch behind the eyes, like something was trying to dig in from the inside. Carla staggered slightly. You feel that? He nodded, like static inside my teeth. Then they reached it, a circular chamber with walls made of reinforced glass, a console covered in analog dials, and at the center, a cylindrical pod, sealed. A low, dull light glowed from within, illuminating faint outlines. A chair, straps, wires, and a symbol. 3 interlocking rings, the same symbol from the documents, the one labeled arc line. Is this where they kept him? Ray whispered. Carla shook her head. I think this is where they made him. On a nearby shelf, they found a series of cassette tapes, labeled only by date. Carla plugged one into a tape player mounted to the wall. A woman's voice, cold and clinical, spoke. Subject K5 continues to show responsive conditioning when exposed to emotional resonance stimuli. Notably, his cognitive reflections mirror those of his observers, indicating possible empathic duplication. Another voice, a man, urgent, harsh. We've gone too far. He's mirroring people's grief now. He doesn't understand it. He becomes it. If he sees someone cry, he starts crying, then doesn't stop. This is no longer a science project. It's psychological vivisection. Click. Silence. Ray sat down, hard. They turned him into a mirror. He said, he feels what people feel, but not like empathy. He absorbs it. Carla shook her head. He's not a mirror. He's a sponge. And someone decided that would be useful. Here's your quirky historical fact. In the 1950s, researchers experimented with emotionally contagious subjects in group psychology tests. It turns out, some people can influence moods around them simply by experiencing them harder. They called it emotive saturation. Ray called it manipulation with extra steps. Suddenly, the walls hummed louder. A panel behind them slid open. An old man, hunched, white lab coat frayed at the edges, stepped into the chamber. His eyes were cloudy, but alert, calculating. Dr. Bunves Carla asked. The man gave a weak nod. I was wondering when someone would come. Ray stood, chest tight. You're supposed to be dead. Vess gave a bitter smile. Aren't we all? He moved slowly, cautiously, not fearful, just tired, like a professor at the end of a lecture series no one attended. I tried to stop it. He said, they said I was the only one who could stabilize him, that he'd imprint on me, but they didn't know what he was yet. He looked at Ray. You're his father. Yes. Ray opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. I guess I am. Vess looked almost sad. Then I'm sorry. For both of you. Diburim. Carla stepped forward. What is Simon? What did they do to him? The old man sighed. They opened the door to a room we weren't supposed to enter. His mind doesn't work like ours. It copies pain. It doesn't distinguish between real and imagined. He sees trauma and relives it like it's his own. Over and over. Ray clenched his fists. Then why did they put him back with Jane? Because she's the only one he didn't absorb. Vess said, her mind blocked him, like static to his signal. She calmed the hum. But if she doesn't know... Carla began. Vess nodded. Then the hum grows louder. The lights flickered. An alarm sounded soft, steady, and familiar. 3 tones, then silence. Then a voice over the intercom. Subject K5 has activated. Ray's knees buckled. Simon. Something had triggered him. And now, someone had just flipped a switch the size of a child. The alarm cut off as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a silence so sharp it felt like a knife pressed flat against Ray's throat. Dr. Ew as Avis turned slowly toward the glass pod. "He's not here," the old man muttered. "Not physically." Ray blinked. "Wait, what do you mean he's activated but not here?" Vess tapped the side of his own temple. "The activation isn't always external. Simon doesn't need a lab to trigger. He needs emotion, a surge, a specific sequence of stimuli. When it hits just right, it turns him on, like a mood lamp with trauma," Carla added. Vess nodded grimly. "A mood bomb. Actually." Ray tried to make sense of it all. A child is child. Kind of engineered to soak up emotions and bounce them back. Harder, sharper. He wasn't psychic. He was a feedback loop. Someone sad around him. He felt it twice as much. Someone scared. He became the fear. The wrong person angry near him. He'd lose control. And he was with Jane, which meant she was probably in danger, which meant everyone near him probably was. Ray grabbed the nearest map of the facility, flipped it over, and started jotting down what he knew, the pattern, the history, the one phrase that haunted every document: echo stabilization, fail-safe, unreliable. "What happens?" he asked Vess. "If he goes full meltdown?" Vess didn't blink. "We've never observed it, because we never survived it." That's your science fact for the day. Emotions affect more than mood. Extreme emotional states, panic, grief, rage can physically alter brain chemistry. Neurotransmitter levels spike, adrenaline floods. Prolonged exposure can literally rewire parts of the brain, especially in children. Now imagine a child whose brain was designed to not just receive those signals, but amplify them. You've basically built a portable storm. Carla pulled Ray aside. "We need to find Jane. Now." Ray nodded. "Yeah, but if this kid gets upset when people around him are emotional, how are we supposed to get close without setting him off?" Vess answered that for them. "Don't go to him. Make him come to you. But give him something safe to find." Ray squinted. Like what a comfort item. More like an anchor. Vess said, "A person. A sound. A memory. Something so familiar it pulls him back when the echo gets too loud." Ray thought for a moment, then pulled a cassette out of his jacket pocket, the one he'd found in the garage freezer, labeled Lullaby, 1995. He handed it to Carla. "I recorded this for Jane," he said. "She played it when she was pregnant. Every night. I didn't even know it mattered. It might," Carla said, "if anything does." They didn't wait. Ray and Carla tore out of the facility in Carla's car, leaving Vess in the dark, muttering something about frequencies and guilt and how the agency was going to sanitize the entire program. Sanitize, as in erase, as in disappear. Ray's phone buzzed in his pocket. A single text from an unknown number. "Don't interfere. It's under control." Ray texted back. "He's a kid, not a lab rat." The reply came instantly, then stopped treating him like one. No sender, no number, just a warning. They reached Jane's town by sundown. Ray had memorized her new address. He hated that he had. Hated more that she hadn't run. Maybe she didn't know what was happening. Or maybe she was waiting. The lights were on inside. A curtain moved. A shape in the window. They parked across the street. "Do we knock?" Carla asked. Ray was halfway out of the car when the door flew open. Jane stood there, holding Simon, her face pale, her arms trembling. "I didn't know who else to call," she said. That's when Ray noticed the man on the lawn, Jane's husband, on the ground, unconscious, possibly dead, and Simon wasn't crying. He was standing, silent, still, eyes glowing faintly blue in the dark. Ooh. Ray approached cautiously, like someone defusing a bomb with good intentions and no manual. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "It's okay. You remember me?" Simon looked up. His eyes flickered like static. He didn't speak, but Ray felt something, a pressure behind his eyes, a ripple down his spine, like the kid had reached in and knocked over a box labeled unresolved issues. Carla stepped forward and pulled out a small portable cassette player, popped in the lullaby tape, pressed play. The sound crackled softly, a simple melody. Aishizor, a woman's voice, Jane's humming along. Simon's head tilted. His mouth opened. This is Mommy's song, he whispered. The static vanished. His eyes turned normal, and he collapsed into Jane's arms, fast asleep. They carried him inside, put him on the couch, sat in silence. All four of them, like survivors of a mild but metaphysically confusing earthquake. Jane broke it first. He's never done that before. She said, he's gotten scared, angry. But this was different. He kept saying, they're coming. They're humming. I didn't know what he meant. Ray exhaled. They were trying to wake him up. Carla looked at the window. Well, if the alarm triggered at the facility, they probably already know where he is. Which meant the question wasn't if they'd come. It was how fast. Ray pulled Jane aside while Carla watched over Simon. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Jane's voice cracked. Because I thought they'd let us go. I thought hiding was enough. I didn't know he'd... Evolve. Evolve, Ray echoed. He's not what they built anymore, she whispered. He's more... He remembers feelings, stores them. People walk into rooms with him and come out different. I don't know how to raise that. I'm not a mother. I'm a panic button. Ray wanted to tell her she was wrong. Instead, he said, he doesn't need perfect. He needs someone who doesn't leave. She nodded, eyes wet. So what now? And that's when Carla said, we move him. Now, before they do, here's your historical tidbit for the evening. In 1987, a man named Rick Rescorla wrote an emergency evacuation plan for the World Trade Center. It was ignored for years, but on 9/11, his plan saved over 700 lives. Sometimes, the difference between tragedy and survival is one person deciding to prepare instead of panic. Ray decided to be that person. They packed quickly. Essentials only. No electronics. No trackers. Jane retrieved a box from under the floorboards. Cash. Passports. SIM cards. A tiny GPS scrambler. Always had a go bag, she said softly. Carla looked impressed. You could have been a scout leader, or a war criminal. Jane smirked. Aren't they the same thing? As they pulled out of the driveway, Simon stirred. He looked up at Ray. You were there. In the cold place. The place with the sad air. Ray glanced back. You remember that? Simon nodded. But you didn't leave. Ray reached back and squeezed his tiny hand. Not this time. And in that moment, no hum, no storm, just the quiet before whatever came next. They drove through the night like fugitives in a discount spy film. No GPS. No phones. No fixed route. Carla took the wheel after 2 hours because Ray's version of navigating involved saying things like, I feel like we're heading east, while clearly driving west. Jane kept Simon in the back. Half asleep. Half glowing. Clinging to an old stuffed rabbit that had apparently survived 3 countries and 1 lab explosion. Its name was Pickles. Ray sat in the passenger seat, flipping through the last of the documents they'd pulled from Icebox. Most were indecipherable strings of test numbers, data graphs, even EEG scans that looked more like EKGs from a robot having a nervous breakdown. But one file stood out, a psychological profile labeled Simon. Subject K5. It read like someone tried to diagnose a myth. Cognitive fluidity exceeds baseline human norms. Subject demonstrates pre-language empathy. Confirmed cases of reverse emotional transference, RIET. Notably, subject K5 exhibits emotional mimicry escalation, in which feelings absorbed from others become amplified and redirected. Final note, subject may function as emotional amplifier or dampener depending on context. Behavioral ethics currently undefined. Wow. Carla glanced at Ray. Did you catch that last line? Ray nodded slowly. They don't know if he's going to save people or break them. And neither did Ray. They stopped at a motel with more bugs than stars on its Yelp page. The receptionist looked like she had once tried to file her taxes with a shotgun. Ray paid cash. Asked no questions. Jane took Simon inside, wrapped him in motel blankets that might have doubled as cheese graters, and lay beside him whispering lullabies into his hair. Ray watched from the doorway. Simon slept easily. Too easily. Like a system rebooting. He stepped outside to get some air. Carla joined him with a can of root beer and a raised eyebrow. "You okay?" Ray sighed. "Defaint okay." Carla sipped, not currently hiding from Black Ops creeps with a semi-psychic child and an ex-wife who fake died 20 years ago. Ray smiled. "Then no. That's your quirky historical fact for the evening in 1967. A Soviet submarine had a nuclear torpedo loaded and ready to fire because they believed World War III had begun. The only thing that stopped them was Vasily Arkhipov, who voted not to launch. One calm man. One intense moment. And the planet lived. Sometimes, the future hangs on a decision made in silence. Ray felt like he was approaching his Arkhipov moment. Because Jane had just told him something else. Something worse. "I think Simon's been activated before." She'd said, last year, there was this incident. A birthday party. A kid broke a balloon. Simon got scared. Everyone started crying. Every single person. Like it was contagious. Took 10 minutes to stop. Ray had just stared at her. "What did you do?" "I moved again. Changed names. But it's getting harder. He's leaking." Ray hadn't replied. There weren't words for that. That night, Ray had a dream. He was back in Icebox, walking through endless white hallways lined with mirrors. Each mirror showed a version of himself, but twisted. One laughing, one crying, one covered in blood, one gone entirely. At the end of the corridor was Simon, sitting cross-legged, surrounded by floating glass shards. "You left," the boy said, "but I came back." Ray woke with a gasp. The motel clock said 4:44 a.m. That felt symbolic and disrespectful. He stepped outside again, only to find Jane already there. Smoking a cigarette she hadn't had the courage to admit she still kept in her bag. Her hands shook as she lit it. "I used to think," she said, exhaling smoke, that hiding was the brave thing, that disappearing was the sacrifice. But now, Ray looked at her. Jane continued, "Now I think cowardice just wears better shoes." Ray nodded. "You ran because they gave you no choice." "I ran," she said softly, "because I didn't trust you to believe me." Ouch, but fair. They left at sunrise. Jane had a plan. She knew someone a fixer from her years in whatever shadowy government play she'd been part of. He was ex-agency, ex-Mossad, ex-sane. His name was Hobbs, and he owed her a favor. They met him at a bait shop that doubled as a taxidermy workshop and tripled as a bad decision. Hobbs wore sunglasses indoors and a t-shirt that said, "Trust no one but tips generously." He didn't blink, just led them to the back where live bait was kept in a cooler next to a freezer full of unlicensed squirrel mounts. "You brought the boy?" Hobbs asked. "Of course I brought the boy," Jane said. "Then we're out of time," he replied. "Here's your true story of the day." In 2001, the FBI declassified Project Artichoke, a real attempt to create hypnotically induced assassins. No, it wasn't just science fiction. It was taxpayer-funded psychological roulette, and while it never officially worked, it gave rise to decades of whispered fear about programmable people. Simon wasn't that, but he was close. An unintentional creation, a kid made sensitive by design, fractured by oversight, and activated by trauma. Hobbs explained the current problem in terms that Ray almost understood. "There's a cascade effect," he said. "The more emotional input Simon receives, the harder it is for his brain to filter. He's turning into a feedback loop. You let that run unchecked long enough. You get collapse, total system burnout, Kid'll either go catatonic, or make an entire room feel what he feels, and never stop. Ray's mouth was dry. So what do we do? You don't do anything, Hobbs said. You disappear. Again, Jane asked. No. Hobbs said. Better. We don't bury you. We replace you. He handed Ray a folder. Inside, new identities. Travel papers. A place in Finland. Rural. Cold. Quiet. Emotionally uninteresting. Finland, Carla asked. What's in Finland? Sauna and moose. Hobbs replied. And no one who'll believe any of this. Ray turned to Jane. She looked at Simon, who was quietly arranging bottle caps in a spiral on the floor. He doesn't need exile, she whispered. He needs normal. Ray looked at the folder, then at the child, then back again. You want normal, Hobbs said. You picked the wrong kid. Ray sighed. No, we didn't. He picked us. Jane stared at him. That was the whole point. Ray said, he didn't become like us. He chose us. Simon looked up then, like he'd heard. I like snow, he said, quietly. Jane blinked. What? Snow's quiet. Simon said, no echoes. And there it was. Decision made by a boy who just wanted to stop feeling the world so loudly. Hobbs nodded once. Finland it is. Ray bent down beside Simon, placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. We'll go where it's quiet, he said. We'll go where the hum can't find you. Simon smiled. For the first time, it reached his eyes. The plane was small, the kind that felt more like a suggestion than an aircraft. It rattled on takeoff, coughed through turbulence, and made a whimpering noise somewhere near the tail that even the pilot admitted was probably fine. Ray sat next to Simon, who was listening to the lullaby cassette through a converted MP3 player Carla rigged together from a thrift store, Walkman, and a Raspberry Pi. He wore oversized headphones and looked like a miniature music critic contemplating a 4-star review. Across the aisle, Jane stared out the window. She hadn't said much since the bait shop, maybe because everything had been moving so fast, maybe because she was too scared to say something wrong and accidentally trigger her kid like a live wire. Carla, meanwhile, was in the row behind, scribbling in a notebook, drafting contingency plans, likely weighing the pros and cons of raising bees in Scandinavia if this all went sideways. The hum had stopped, but the silence left behind almost worse. Finland greeted them with snow, thick, soft, whispering snow that seemed to muffle every sound and memory they carried. The air was so cold it felt like someone had weaponized mint. Their safe house was a cabin near the woods, stocked with canned goods, a sauna, and more antlers than anyone strictly needed. It had Wi-Fi, sort of, and a generator that coughed like a lifelong smoker. Hobbs had delivered on his promise. New names, clean passports, a family of 3 tucked into the armpit of Europe. Off the radar, off the grid, and according to the local welcome brochure, close to a moose preserve. Simon was thrilled about the moose. Ray was not thrilled about the outhouse. Within a week, the rhythm began. Wake up, chop wood, make porridge. Keep Simon calm. Repeat. It wasn't normal, but it was quiet, which was almost better. Simon took to Finland like he'd been born in a snowsuit. He started drawing again, mostly spirals, sometimes birds. Once, he drew a picture of a house that looked eerily like icebox, except the walls were made of clouds, and one of the doors was labeled, "No, thank you." Ray hung that one on the fridge. Jane began to relax. Incrementally, like someone turning down the volume on a fear that had played at full blast for 27 years. She laughed again, even made soup. Carla stayed a week longer than she said she would, then finally boarded a flight back, leaving them with one last comment. If the kid starts speaking Latin in his sleep, call me. One day, Ray found Simon standing outside in the snow, eyes closed, arms outstretched. What are you doing? He asked. Simon opened one eye, listening. To what? Simon smiled. The quiet. Ray knelt beside him. Is it good quiet? Simon nodded. It doesn't echo here. Ray tried not to cry, settled for a smile and a deep inhale of pine air so crisp it could have cured a sinus infection. Here's your historical twist of the day in the 19th century. The Finnish government once built entire silent schools in Lapland, where children were taught in total quiet, with hand gestures and visual cues, as a way of promoting introspection and emotional self-regulation. Their slogan, "In silence, we see ourselves." Ray thought maybe Finland had always been waiting for Simon, because the kid was changing, not in the creepy horror movie way, no glowing eyes, no sudden Latin. But he was softer, more stable. He even started laughing, not the contagious kind that spreads tears and migraines, just honest-to-goodness kid laughter, like a wind chime made of joy. And every time he did, Jane looked like she'd just been handed the antidote to everything. But safety is a rented thing, and they had paid in fake names. It was a Thursday, snow falling sideways. Ray was chopping wood when the phone, an old rotary model connected to a hard line only 3 people had the number for, rang. He picked up. Silence. Then, crackling. They found him. It was Hobbs. Ray gripped the receiver. Who? Project Remnants. Rogue agents? Someone inside Icebox survived the purge. They've been sniffing data trails. They just pinged Helsinki. Ray swore. What do we do? You stay put. I'll send a failsafe. What does that mean? It means, trust me, and maybe teach the kid to lie better. The line went dead. Ray didn't tell Jane immediately. He didn't want to watch her joy snap in half like a frozen twig. But Simon already knew. That night, he looked up from his coloring book and said, "Bad people are dreaming about me again." Ray sat beside him. How do you know? Simon tapped his temple. Because I heard them while I was sleeping. Ray swallowed. What did they say? Simon drew a spiral on the page. They want me to come back. Do you want to? Simon shook his head. They don't feel like people. They feel like questions. Ray blinked. Questions. Simon nodded. Scary ones. Like if I'm me, or if I'm them. Ray hugged him tight. You're you. You're ours. And nobody's taking you again. Simon looked up. Promise. Ray didn't flinch. Promise. The next morning, Carla called. They sent a drone to the bait shop. Ray's blood froze. What? They wanted Hobbs. He's gone. The shop's gone. Jane paced the kitchen while Simon stacked soup cans into a perfect pyramid. What now? She asked. Ray looked out the window. The forest loomed like a wall of secrets. He turned back to her. We prepare. For what? For the questions to come. Looking for their answer. And here's your philosophical debate of the day. Is a person still themselves if someone else designed who they'd be? Are we just stories, told by others until we take the pen back? Ray didn't have an answer. But he did have a child, one who had stopped humming, one who had started to smile, and he'd be damned if someone rewrote that story again. They called it the White Hour. That weird in-between time just before sunrise, when the snow doesn't reflect light so much as glow with the memory of it. Everything turns blue and quiet, and a little too still, like nature is bracing for something. Ray stood outside the cabin that morning, axe in hand, pretending to chop wood but mostly thinking about what it meant to protect something you didn't fully understand. Behind him, Jane made tea. Simon was drawing again. But not spirals this time, just trees, tall, dark green ones with eyes. Ray tried not to read too much into that. Then he saw it, a glint of glass on the ridge beyond the trees. Binoculars. He ducked instinctively and moved along the side of the cabin to peer through the spotting scope he and Carla had set up on a hunch. He zoomed. There a figure on the ridge, wearing white, camouflaged, but not enough. Watching. The kind of watching that said, we want to know if the subject is active. Not we're here to reunite a family. Ray hissed through his teeth. They found us. And Jane joined him at the window. Saw the figure. And didn't even blink. She just whispered, "Go bags." Ray nodded. By the back door. They had always known this was temporary. Quiet isn't something you get in stories like this. It's something you rent. At criminally high emotional interest. Simon peeked around the corner. Are the sad men here? Ray turned to him slowly. They're not here yet, but they're looking. Simon nodded solemnly. Should I hum? Ray's blood froze. What? Simon pointed at his chest. The hum. It keeps them away, but I have to feel it, and I don't want to feel that again. Jane crouched down beside him. We don't need the hum. Honey, we just need to stay smart. Simon tilted his head. What if I make them go away? Ray stepped in quickly. No. We don't want to make anyone go away. Simon looked down. Even if they want to take me. Ray hesitated. Because honestly, he did want to make them go away. Here's your real-world fact of the day. In 1959, the CIA attempted to use behavioral predictability algorithms to track targets by analyzing emotional reactions in crowds. It was part of a now-defunct program called EmotionNet, which theorized that intense feelings could ripple through public spaces like sound waves. It was scrapped because it lacked repeatable results. But Ray had a sneaking suspicion Simon was the missing variable. Kawar, a walking ripple. And now, the world wanted him back. Carla called from a burner phone 2 towns over. They're circling, she said. 2 agents in Helsinki. 1 ID'd from the Icebox archive. They're not here for surveillance. They're here for retrieval. Are they armed? Ray, she said. Everyone's armed. Even the baristas have pepper spray and emotional trauma. He didn't laugh. What do we do? Trigger the failsafe, she said. Now. Ray glanced at Jane. She nodded grimly. The failsafe wasn't dramatic. No explosions. No helicopters. It was a code phrase spoken into a cheap radio Hobbs had left behind. Ray pressed the button, whispered, "Condition Glacier." Static answered. Then, a calm voice acknowledged. The failsafe was simple. A call to a favor Hobbs had buried in an old Finnish civil defense unit. A quiet team of very serious people with very snowy credentials who didn't care why you were running, just that someone shouldn't be following. They had an exit route ready, a truck in a garage, blank documents, new names. But it would only work once, and it wouldn't come quickly. Night fell early. They moved Simon to the crawl space beneath the cabin, made it into a fort. Jane stayed with him, telling bedtime stories that started with, "Once upon a time, there was a boy who could feel too much," and ended with, "But he found a place where that was okay." Ray watched the trees. Then he saw the light. A flicker in the woods. Then another. Then a voice on a loudspeaker, crackling through the trees. Raymond Kessler, Jane Milner. This is your last warning. Release the child, and no one will be harmed. Ray turned to Jane. Do we look like people who give up? She shook her head. We look like people who do very stupid things with incredible commitment. Ray smirked. Good. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the front door and stepped out. 5 figures stood at the tree line. Military gear, faces masked. No insignias. One stepped forward. This isn't about you. We just want the boy. Ray held his ground. He's not yours. You don't understand what he is. No. Ray said, you don't. And then Simon walked out. Barefoot. Calm. Der Kothers. Tiny fists at his sides. No more hiding. He said. Jane shouted. Simon, get back. But he didn't move. He just looked at the men. And the hum began. Soft. Like a whisper inside a heartbeat. The snow around him shifted. The air bent. And every man in that tree line dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. Ray ran to him. Simon. Stop. But Simon was crying. Tears running silently. More. I didn't mean to hurt them, he whispered. I just wanted them to feel what I feel. Ray knelt. Pulled him close. You don't need to do this. You don't have to show them anything. Smarn trembled. But it's always inside me. Jane joined them, arms around them both. It doesn't have to be, she whispered. And slowly, Simon breathed out. The hum stopped. The men on the ground were sobbing, not from pain, from something else. One whispered, "My mother's perfume." I hadn't remembered that in 20 years. Another muttered, "I miss my dog." They weren't broken. They were human. Simon had turned them back into people. And he had done it by accident. Here's your quirky fact. Some scientists believe trees can communicate through underground networks of fungi sharing nutrients, signaling danger. They call it the Wood Wide Web. And maybe that's what Simon was, part of a hidden system, connecting people through feelings the way trees connect through roots. Whatever he wasn't a weapon. He was a bridge. And tonight, he saved them all. The next morning, Hobbs arrived in a beat-up van full of passports and sardines. "I told you not to interfere," he grunted. Ray smiled. "Yeah, and you told me not to trust anyone. You really need to pick a lane." Hobbs looked at Simon, who was making snow angels in silence. "He's not done changing," Hobbs warned. Ray nodded. "Neither are we." The team was gone. The files were burned. Icebox, whatever remained of it, would scatter again. But this time, Ray and Jane weren't running. They were raising. The weeks that followed felt borrowed from someone else's life, someone quieter, softer, with fewer burned passports and more hot chocolate. The snow kept falling, and Simon kept drawing. And for the first time in decades, Ray and Jane moved through a day without glancing over their shoulders like someone might yank the rug out from under them. They didn't talk about Icebox anymore, or the hum, or what Simon might become. They talked about now what was for dinner, how many logs they had left for the stove, and whether or not Finnish squirrels had vendettas. Ray swore they were watching him. Carla sent encrypted check-ins every week. Hobbs vanished again. Presumably into whatever Black Ops knitting circle he belonged to. The world went quiet. Simon's drawings changed. No more spirals. No more glowing trees. Just normal things now, saunas. Pancakes. A moose he named Gerald, who was entirely fictional and also apparently in a relationship with the stuffed rabbit. Pickles. He started laughing again. Real laughter. Not the kind that bounced back pain. He played board games with Ray and built snow forts with Jane. He learned to cook, badly. His first attempt at soup tasted like wet curiosity. But they all ate it anyway. And the hum, it faded. Not gone, but faint. Like an old radio that still works but only when you really want it to. One night, as the wind whispered past the cabin and the fire cracked softly in the hearth, Simon asked a question that knocked the air out of Ray's lungs. "Was I ever supposed to be real?" Ray blinked, heart thudding. Jane looked at him across the couch, her face unreadable. Ray leaned in. "You were always real," he said gently, "even before you were born." Simon tilted his head. "But they made me—" Ray nodded. "Sure, but we raised you." Simon frowned. "Isn't that the same thing?" Ray paused, then smiled. "Making something is easy. Raising it. That's the hard part. That's the part where love lives." Simon nodded like he sort of got it, then returned to stacking marshmallows into what appeared to be a model of the UN building. And here's your final, true fact. The earliest known lullaby was found inscribed on a 4-year-old tablet from ancient Babylonia. It was written in cuneiform and roughly translates to, "Please stop crying before you summon demons." Humanity's been trying to calm its children and its fears for millennia. Ray now understood why. The future isn't something you prepare for. It's something you protect, one quiet day at a time. Later, as snow fell again, and the world outside the windows blurred into soft gray stillness, Ray closed his eyes on the couch. Jane leaned against his shoulder. Simon was asleep under a mountain of blankets. Pickles perched on his chest like a weary sentry. Ray thought of the note in the garage. Not dead, not sorry. He was starting to understand it. Because sometimes, survival was the apology. And other times, it was just the beginning. They didn't know what would come next. But for now, they had soup, fire, and the sound of no one knocking. And that was enough.